皆様、本日は公益財団法人笹川平和財団主催講演会、なぜ女性の視点が必要なのか、日本、インドネシアの女性外相が語るにご参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございます。私、本日司会を務めます笹川平和財団平和構築支援グループ研究員の高澤陽子と申します。開会に先立ちまして皆様にご案内申し上げます。まず、本イベントは事前にご登録いただいているメディア関係者の方々を除き、撮影、録画、録音することはできません。本日はお手元のレシーバーを介しまして同時通訳をご利用いただくことが可能となっております。お手元のレシーバーはチャンネル1が日本語、チャンネル2が英語となっております。会場内での喫煙はご遠慮くださいますようお願いいたします。携帯電話、スマートフォンは電源をお切りいただくか、マナーモードに設定いただき、音が鳴らないようにご配慮をお願いいたします。また、会場内での通話はご遠慮ください。最後に、本イベントの模様は後日笹川平和財団の YouTube チャンネルで公開いたします。開会は10時を予定しております。お席にて今しばらくお待ちください。 皆様、定刻を過ぎておりますが、開始までもうしばらくお待ちくださいませ。それでは始めさせていただきます。皆様、本日は大変お忙しい中、公益財団法人笹川平和財団主催講演会、なぜ女性の視点が必要なのか、日本、インドネシアの女性外相が語るにご来場いただき、誠にありがとうございます。まずは開会にあたり、主催者を代表いたしまして、公益財団法人笹川平和財団理事長須波敦よりご挨拶申し上げます。
本日は土曜日の朝から大勢の方に来ていただき、本当にありがとうございます。そしてご多忙なスケジュールの合間を縫って、ルトノ外務大臣、そして、上川外務大臣のお二人が、この私どもの笹川平和財団に来てくださったことを非常に光栄であるとともに心より御礼申し上げます。ありがとうございます。また、ASEAN 各地より、カルティカ ASEAN 平和と和解研究所プログラムマネージャー、そしてアミナイスラムと民主主義センター所長、ヌルイザ財務大臣特別アドバイザリーボード共同議長もご参加いただきました。ありがとうございます。16日から18日の日程で日本ASEAN 友好協力50周年特別首脳会議が始まります。日本と ASEAN 諸国のさらなる連携強化につながる重要なモメンタムであると思っております。安全保障環境が非常に厳しい今日、日本と ASEAN 諸国が協力して世界とアジア太平洋地域の安定にいかに寄与できるのか、共に知恵を絞る必要があります。このような不確実な世界情勢において、課題解決のためには、多様な視点から物事を見定め、クリエイティブな発想がこれまで以上に求められております。そして特にこれまで十分に反映されてこなかった女性の視点や意思決定への参画が極めて大きな変革を起こすと期待されているところであります。女性の視点の統合が重要であると言われている中で、本日はアジアで外交をリードするお二人の話を聞く機会をいただき、非常に嬉しく思っております。本講演会は日本 ASEAN 友好協力50周年サミットのサイドイベントとして、ASEAN と日本の間でさらに議論を進め、連携していかなければならない WPS、Women Peace and Security アジェンダの推進を念頭に、2人の女性外務大臣に語っていただくというものでございます。また、後半は ASEAN 諸国各国でご活躍されている3人の女性リーダーにもご参加いただき、日本とどのような連携が可能か、議論を深めていただきたいと思います。笹川平和財団は非営利の民間財団であり、さまざまな分野、地域の国際協力を行っております。その中でも東南アジアにおける平和構築事業には力を入れており、長年対新南部紛争の和平に向けた取り組みを行ってきました。そして現場では女性グループへの支援も積極的に行っております。WPS アジェンダの推進は現場での経験に基づき、その重要性を実感しているからこそ実施できる重要な 取り組みの一つです。ローカルな声をグローバルな場に届けるべく、私ども笹川平和財団では WPS に関する調査や政策提言も行っております。WPS アジェンダの推進には男性のエンゲージメントが極めて重要であると考えから、男性性と平和構築の関わりについても東南アジアの紛争後の地域で調査研究を行い、その結果を先日上川大臣にもビデオメッセージでをいただきましたけれども、国連本部で報告してきたばかりであります。また私ども笹川平和財団は WPS アジェンダの日本国内での推進にも力を入れておりまして、昨年12月に発足した WPS 議連を側面的に抑えしながら、関連省庁や各国大使館とも連携し WPS アジェンダの推進に取り組んでいます。こうした取り組みもですね、上川大臣が大臣になられる前から WPS 議連の立ち上げ、そして会長として多くの国会議員の方々と連携して WPS の重要性を深く認識されている、そうしたことで我々も引き続き WPS の推進に協力していきたいというふうに思っているところであります。こうした取り組みは日本財団笹川会長をはじめ我々財団の中ではですね、笹川流民間外交というふうに位置づけて一生懸命取り組んでいるところでございます。最後にこのような重要なモメンタムにこのイベントを開催することができましたこと、改めて心から感謝を申し上げ、両女性外務大臣のお話とアジアの女性のリーダーたちのお話をお聞きできるのを楽しみにしながら、私のご挨拶終わらせていただきます。ありがとうございます。
須波理事長、ありがとうございました。それではこれより第1部のセッションを始めさせていただきます。上川陽子外務大臣とルトノ・マルスディ外務大臣に壇上へご着席をお願いいたします。
皆さんおはようございます。笹川平和財団の堀場と申します。今日はモデレーターということでよろしくお願いいたします。まずはですね、超ご多忙な日程の中、本当に帰ってきたばかりだと聞いておりますけれども、上川外務大臣、そしてルトノ外務大臣、笹川平和財団へようこそ。terima kasih banyak。本当に光栄でございます。ありがとうございます。対談をスタートする前にですね、まずは上川大臣の方から一言、そしてその後ルトノ外務大臣の方から一言いただいた上で対談に入らさせていただきたいと思いますので、上川大臣よろしくお願いいたします。
皆さんおはようございます。本日はルトノ大臣とともにウジャンティ ASEAN 平和と和解研究所プロジェクトマネージャー、またベルナンドイスラムと民主主義センター所長、そしてアンワル財務大臣特別アドバイザリーボディ共同議長をはじめとする参加者の皆様と、この WPS の重要性につきまして意見交換ができる機会ということで大変嬉しく思います。まず本日の対談の主催者であります笹川平和財団の皆様に改めて心から感謝申し上げます。ありがとうございました。WPS すなわち Women Peace and Security、 この WPS は2000年に安保理で採択をされました決議第1325号に初めて明記をされた考え方でございます。紛争下の女性や女児の保護及び紛争予防から和平プロセス、 紛争後の平和構築に至るまでの意思決定のすべての段階における女性の平等で従前な参画を得ることによって、より持続可能な平和に近づこうというものでございます。これまでに合計10本の関連決議が採択されておりまして、これらの決議におきましては、第一に、加盟国による紛争下の性的暴力防止及び対処のためのメカニズムの構築、第二に、和平プロセス等への女性の参画、性的暴力防止に向けた治安・司法当局の対応、被害者・サバイバー中心のアプローチやマルチステークホルダーによる紛争予防への参加の重要性、また第3に対テロリズム及び暴力的過激主義の予防を WPS に統合することや、平和と安全保障の活動と意思決定への女性の参画等、WPS アジェンダの実施強化が求められているところであります。WPS は急速に国際社会で主流化をしております。それまでは、伝統的に言いますと、社会経済分野の課題であったこの女性の問題を安全保障の分野に結びつけた点で非常に重要であると考えております。WPS はこの紛争や平和構築などに関する概念でありまして、一見自分とはちょっと遠いところにあると思われるかもしれません。しかし現在のウクライナ、そしてガザにおける悲惨な状況と、それらの状況が食料やエネルギーをはじめとする世界経済に与えている影響を考えれば、経済と平和と安定を不可分の課題として包括的に議論をすべきことは明白であります。平和安全保障分野に女性の視点を入れることは、民主主義の観点から適切であるのみならず、より多様な視点が加わることにより、政治が一層安定し、民主主義が豊かに育まれる、こうしたプロセスは、複合的な危機に直面している世界の安全にとって不可欠であると考えております。このような意見や信念の共有は、特にG7 諸国におきまして具体的な形で始まっているところであります。WPS に対する国際社会共通のコミットメントにおける格差を一層縮めるため、日本国内でも国際協力の分野におきましても、WPS に関する取り組みを加速させる時が来ていると考えております。本日はアフガニスタンの女性・女児の教育支援をはじめとする地域や国際社会における WPS アジェンダを積極的に推進していらっしゃいますルトノ外務大臣とともに WPS につきましてこうして語り合うことができるということ、そして皆さんとこうした取り組みにおきまして協力し合うことができる、こうした機会を、そして可能性をいただいたことについては心から感謝申し上げているところでございます。アジア太平洋地域におきましても、日本は ASEAN、とりわけルトノ外務大臣と連携をして WPS アジェンダの推進と WPS を次の次元に引き上げるための議論を進めてまいりたいと思っております。今日はその大きなスタートの時ということでありますので、皆さんと共に今日短い時間ではありますが、大変貴重な重要なミーティングとなるよう努力させていただきます。どうぞよろしくお願い申し上げます。ありがとうございました。
上川外務大臣、ありがとうございました。続きましてルトノ外務大臣の方からよろしくお願いいたします。
Well, thank you very much, moderator, Minister Kamikawa, Chairman Yohei Sasakawa, Dr. Atsushi Tsunami, ambassadors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I forgot that today is Saturday, because for me, every day is Monday. Colleagues, First of all, my gratitude to Sasakawa Peace Foundation for hosting this very important event and inviting me to share my thought. Sasakawa Foundation, Peace Foundation is not new for me. I have a constant and intensive communication with the foundation, in particular discussing the situation in Myanmar and how we can contribute to help the people of Myanmar. Colleagues, actually a couple of days ago, I think 2 days ago, I was in Geneva together with Minister Kamikawa. We were together on the Global Refugee Forum. She took part on the morning session. I took part on the afternoon session. So I just landed from Geneva, and on top of the Global Global Refugee Forum, I attended also the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then ministerial level meeting on Gaza. And I met with so many colleagues from the ICRC, WHO, and then the High Commissioner on Human Rights and many others. Most of the discussion on Gaza. Colleagues, it is almost 2 months that I'm always on the road, on diplomatic roads, to make efforts and find ways to end violence in Gaza. So I visited Washington, D.C., Beijing, Moscow, London, Paris. I attended the meetings in Jeddah and Riyadh, in the UN meetings in New York, in Geneva. Now I'm in Tokyo, and I will travel further to the northern part of Africa right after my Tokyo visit. So just a day before Christmas Day, I will only land in Jakarta. Why I do that, colleagues? We see that the civilian and people in Gaza has been suffering too much. Up to 1.9 million people, or over 85% of the population, has been displaced across the Gaza Strip, and even some encounter multiple times of displacement. And families are forced to move repeatedly in search of safety. As per now, more than 18,787 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and about 70% of whom are reported women and children. And over 50,897 have reportedly been injured. Based on the UN OCHA data, the violence is now not taking place in Gaza, but also in West Bank. 271 Palestinians, including 69 children, were killed in West Bank. So colleagues, I'm a woman. As a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother, and of course, I'm a foreign minister as well. I cannot see this continues. And I promise to myself to defend justice and humanity. And I want to be on the right side of the history to defend justice and humanity. And I'm happy that this is not only the voice of women on this case, but this is also the voice of all of us, men, women, the voice of humanity. And it is well reflected in the resolution of the UNGA just adopted on the 12th of December, where Japan and Indonesia voted yes for that resolution. Colleagues, ASEAN and Japan is celebrating the 50th anniversary of cooperation. The cooperation and friendship between Japan and Southeast Asia countries becomes more important than before amidst many conflicts and wars. Our cooperation should prevent tensions and conflict in the region. It's enough. We have enough conflict, tension, war in the globe, in the world. So we should strengthen the cooperation, including to prevent tension and conflict in our region. So that's why during the 50th, during the summit, one of the issues that will be discussed is on the peace issue in the region. So in a world becoming more divided, we need inclusive perspective that can enrich our understanding, enhance our action, and bridge differences. And for sure, we need women perspective. Women perspective are not merely about women, but about everyone. Not only about rights, but also about responsibilities. With the privilege, of course, come big responsibility. How women perspective can make foreign policy not only effective, but also equitable and empowering. Before moving on to the discussion later on, let me share how Indonesia has been promoting women's perspective in two fronts, regional and multilateral. In the regional front, Indonesia has been leading WPS agenda in ASEAN to strengthen the role of women in peace process as a transformative force for sustaining peace. I recall very much in 2019, Indonesia initiated Southeast Asia Network of Women Peace Negotiators and Mediators, the first and only such network in the region. And we look forward to working together with Japan to strengthen and make the most of this network. And then on the multilateral front, Indonesia has been supporting women participation in the UN peacekeeping operation. In 2020, Indonesia initiated Resolution 2538. 2538, the first ever UNSC resolution on women in peacekeeping operation. And today, there are 119 Indonesian women peacekeepers in 7 missions. They are working hard, very hard, hand in hand with their male counterpart to ensuring peace on the ground and connected with the local communities. I visited almost all of them in their mission, and I talked to them, the women peacekeepers and the local community, and I can feel from the ground the need for more women peacekeepers on the ground. And I'm proud that one of them, one of the Indonesian female peacekeepers, just won an award as the UN Women Police Officer of the Year. So I'm very proud of her. And then at the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial in Ghana this month, Indonesia committed to deploy additional 865 peacekeepers, of which 155 are women. And Indonesia and Japan have a long-standing cooperation in training peacekeepers, and I hope that we can continue this very good cooperation and tradition and provide more capacity building catered for women peacekeepers. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, more than ever, women perspectives are vital to global peace and security. And we must ensure that they are heard and valued, because investing in women is investing in a brighter future for all of us. And I thank you very much.
ルトノ外務大臣、ありがとうございました。さて、早速ではございますけれども、本日はお二人の経験をもとにですね、お話を伺っていきたいなと思っております。今日のテーマは、なぜ女性の視点が必要なのかということで、お二人は長年政治家として、そして外交官として、性別にかかわらず、すべての国民のためにお仕事をされてきたんだと思っております。しかしですね、そんなお二人だからこそ、今日は女性の視点にこだわってお話ししていただけたらなと思っております。時間も限られておりますので、すぐ質問に移りたいと思うんですけれども、まずはルトノ外務大臣にお聞きしたいと思います。外務省にお勤めの後、ジョコビ政権が始まった2014年からもう約10年になると思いますけれども、2期目もずっと外務大臣を務められていらっしゃるルトノ外務大臣ですけれども、今年は ASEAN の議長国として、そして昨年は G20 の議長国の外務大臣として大役を果たされてこられました。特にASEAN の外務大臣全員実は男性なんですけれども、唯一の外務大臣、女性の外務大臣がルトノ外務大臣でありますし、インドネシアで初の外務大臣、女性の外務大臣もルトノ外務大臣でございます。女性だからこそ可能になったこと、女性の視点が入った決定だったからこそ成功したこと、そしてまた男性に囲まれているから難しかったこと、このあたりも実は学生の方からもたくさん質問がおりまして、事前に質問を受け付けていたんですけれども、そういった質問もありましたので、ぜひ難しかったこと、そして女性の視点が入った女性だったからこそ成功したこと、このあたりの経験を少し共有していただけると嬉しいです。よろしくお願いします。
Right. Well, thank you very much for that question, that very interesting and important question. So, to be the only female foreign minister in ASEAN, if you ask me, how do you feel? I feel good. No problem. And, you know, I recall when I joined the Foreign Service in 1986. So how many years ago? It shows that I'm old. People say that diplomacy is men's word. And then when I was about to join, my parent asked me, "Are you serious to join the Foreign Service? Because that is not the place for the women." And I said, "Yes, I'm quite sure to join the Foreign Service. I just want to prove that the perception that diplomacy belongs to men is wrong. And I think I have sufficient proof to say that now." On my foreign ministry in the last 15 years, almost 50% of the new diplomats are female diplomats. And now in our embassies, almost 50% and sometimes 60 to 70% of the diplomats are women. The challenges are how to bring this asset, the equal share of female and male diplomats, further up on the decision-making level. Because we still know that the more we are up on the decision-making level, the less women we see. And I'm quite sure That is not because I'm a woman, but I'm quite sure in any decision which involve women, the result of the decision will be much better because of men. Are you agree with that? Do you agree with that? You have to agree with that. Because when women is there, it does not, we don't only represent the interests of us women, but also the interests of children as well. So the inclusiveness perspective is there. And then G20 chairmanship, presidency, ASEAN chairmanship. Again, back to your question. What is the role of women? You know, last year when we presided the G20, it was really, really a nightmare year for Indonesia. Because the situation was so tough. The negotiation was so tough. And also in the ASEAN, because of the geopolitical situation. And then, Minister Kamikawa, sometimes because the negotiators were there intensively, I know that they are tired of this negotiating on and on and on. And then they come back to me and said that, well, it seems that we cannot make it. We cannot make it. And I keep saying, we can make it. We can make it. So, in short, finally, both in the G20 as well as on the East Asia Summit, we can make it to have a consensus on the declaration. Again, it shows that even when it comes to negotiation, the endurance of women, if it is not better, then equally good as men. And I think we are tough enough to get pressure, whatever pressure. We look soft, but we are not. We are not. And I pay attention because you mentioned, Minister Kamikawa mentioned about Afghanistan. Then I should mention also Afghanistan. Our attention, Indonesia attention to bring equal access to Afghan women to education. We started to give the scholarship to them. And even when I landed in Jakarta, and then on the 28, 29, I will meet the Afghan students in Indonesia, female and male, to have a chat with them. How do you feel being in Indonesia? So we really want to bring a concrete cooperation to help women to get the equal access to education. And in Afghanistan as well, we provided, because the polio outbreak is taking place. Then I talked with the Afghan authorities, with the NGOs, and they said that can Indonesia help to provide the polio vaccine? And I said, yes, let me try to do that. And then we decided to offer 10 million polio doses of polio vaccine to Afghanistan. So once again, in short, the perspective of women is needed to have, if you want to have a comprehensive perspective in making any decision. And any decision involved of women, I'm sure, will be better. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。まさに女性はソフトに見えるけれども強いということはこのお二人が証明されているんじゃないかなと思います。続きまして上川大臣にもお聞きしたいと思います。上川大臣は法務大臣、多分日本で一番長いんじゃないですかね。 長年務められまして、そしてこの9月に20年ぶり、ようやくです、日本も20年ぶりに女性の外務大臣となられまして、G7 でも活躍され、そしてリーダーシップをいろんなところで発揮されていると思うんですけれども、この目まぐるしい国際情勢の変化に対応しながら、この外交努力を続けていらっしゃる中で、WPS というのもいろんなところで発信されていると聞いております。上川大臣の WPS アジェンダの推進というもののパッションについて、どうして推進をしていかなければならないのかというところのパッションをぜひお聞かせ願いと思います。よろしくお願いします。
ありがとうございます。今のご質問に答える前に、ちょっと私の人間の尊厳というかにかかる分野で、ちょっと議会議員としてどういう活動をしてきたのかということを少し触れさせていただきます。私は2000年の当選の今7期目の国会議員でありますが、一番初めに国際会議に出たのがインターパラメンタリーユニオンという IPU という会合でありました。アフリカのモロッコで開催された会議に初めて出席いたしまして、そしてその時にはそのデレゲーションにですね、女性が必ず入らないとそのボーツですね、それをマイナスされるという、一つのペナルティを課せられるというルール作りというのがその当時行われていたところであります。デレゲーションの中で女性が週3で1人ずつという状況で向こうに行ったわけでありますが、その時にちょうど北京会議という会議の後に女性の会議というのが IPU の中にもできまして、そしてその執行部にノミネートされて選挙で選ばれて2年間執行部に入ったというのが一番初めの経験だったんです。でその時に私が取り組みたいと思ったテーマは人身取引の問題でありまして、特に国境を越えて女性や子どもたちの性が搾取されているという現実、あるいは家事労働に女性の子どもたちがある意味では搾取されているという現実が世界中に起こっているということをテーマに、このテーマを提案をいたしまして、この場でそういう問題について扱わせていただきました。また国内におきましては、日本の中でも性的暴力の問題等がございまして、それにかかる法律作り、議会一の役割は立法することでありますので、その立法のための議員立法化を目指して議連を立ち上げて活動したりするということをしてまいりました。でもその時も、女性の視点ということは大変大事なんですが、必ず男性と一緒にチームを組んでやるということを心がけていき、いろんな視点で社会のいろんな問題について肉薄していくということが極めて重要であるというふうに思って、そして議員立法の中にもそうした視点はもちろん女性の視点は持ち込むんですけれども、社会全体でそれをリフトアップしていただかなければいけませんので、男性あるいは若い世代の皆さんの視点というのも取り込もうということで活動してきた。そういう中で被害者の基本法を作ったり、そして性的搾取の問題について動いたり、 DV の問題についてもやらせていただいたりしてきたというのがちょっとバックグラウンドとしてご紹介をさせていただきます。それで今法務大臣ということであります。もう一つの視点、先ほどもルトノさんからもお話がありましたが、法の支配というところが一番共通のインフラではないかというふうに思っておりまして、この法の支配の分野におけるこのグローバルな取り組みの中でも、また国内の取り組みの中でも相互にそれをリンクしていくことがなければ、それぞれの国内法と国際的なフレームワークが違っていると、その狭間で先ほどのような人身取引の問題が発生したりするということがあるので、必ず国際的視点で法も考えていかなければいけないということを大事に、そして特に日本の場合にはベトナムを一番初めのスタートとして法整備支援という形で、その国のルール作りに日本の知見を活用していただきたいと、そしてそれに伴って人材も養成していくという形で、長い蓄積があったということに着目をいたしまして、司法外交ということに取り組みをいたしてきたところであります。そういう中で国際機関やまたさまざまな市民社会も含めまして、SDGs の中にあるゴール17と18、マルチステークホルダーパートナーシップ、そして同時に法のルールを展開していくという意味での ゴールがありますので、それに向けて、2021年にちょうど京都コングレスというクリミナルジャスティス、こういった分野についての国際会議が開かれまして、それのホスト国として関わらせていただいたということであります。それで私はそうした中で昨年の9月に笹川平和財団さんが共催者としてニューヨークでインターナショナル・ピース・インスティテュートという組織で堀場さんも一緒に本当に行かせていただきましたけれども、私も初めてその会にパネラーとして参加をさせていただきました。このテーマは女性平和リーダーシップというテーマのシンポジウムでありまして、そのパネリストの中として発言をさせていただきましたが、そのディスカッションの中で他の国々あるいは国連機関の中でこの WPS という非常に新しい日本の中では新しい切り口、つまり平和に女性が関わる、この感覚についてちょっと衝撃的な経験をしたところであります。そのくらい私自身の中にも遅れているというか、十分に理解していなかった分野があったということでありまして、非常に衝撃を受けて帰ってまいりました。そして帰国してすぐにこれはですね、この視点で取り組んでいくことが大事だということで、特にそれぞれの分野ではこの分野についてそれぞれの分野では WPS 的な視点は入ってるんですけれども、それを包括をして、そして一つのメッセージとして皆さんで共有をし、縦割りの中で動いてきたことをこの全体感の中で捉えていくという視点というのは非常に重要だということを感じまして、そしてこの WPS の視点を特に日本の場合には災害対応というところにおいては、これはケイオティックシチュエーションになりますし、避難民も出てきますので、まさに紛争の避難民、難民と同じようにこの問題にも取り組む必要があるのではないかということで、日本のそうした知見を生かすこともできる分野があるということも想定しながら、これに仲間を募ろうということで議員の仲間を募りまして、そして議員連を立ち上げたところであります。私はこの立ち上げの中で WPS 議会人ネットジャパン WPS パリメンタリーユニオンのネットジャパンというそういう組織を立ち上げたんですが、自公連立で今動いているところでありますので、超党派の動きとして今仕掛けをしているところであります。そしてその中に今まで取り込んできた人間の尊厳であるとか、紛争地域におきましてのさまざまな人道的支援、いろんなものをこの中に包括させることができるんじゃないか、その可能性があるんじゃないかということを考えて活動しているところであります。また今日のトドさんのお話のように、もうすでにさまざまな実践活動をしていらっしゃるという事例を、また日本の中の災害の救助の中での全く紛争地域と同じような視点の中の視点をある意味では交換をし合いながら、そして今の中に平和を作っていくために私たちは何をすべきなのか、そして実際に行動を伴っていくフレームワークを作るためにはどうしたらいいのか、そのためには予算をどうしたらいいのか、いろんな要素が関わりますので、こういうことについてこのプラットフォームを中心に考えつつといったところで外務大臣に就任したということでありまして、まさにこの流れをですね、大きな主流化を日本の中でも共にASEANの国々とも、あるいはヨーロッパの国々とも連携をしながらしてまいりたいというふうに思っています。それで今年一つの大きなエポックが出まして、日本の予算の基盤となるいわゆる骨太の方針というのがあります。経済財政運営と改革の基本方針2023ということで、毎年5、6月の時点に作られるわけでありますが、次の年の予算の部分を位置づけるものでありまして、この中に WPS というキーワードが入ったんです。初めて予算の章に入りまして、そして同時に各省庁、関係する省庁でいきますと、防衛省、また法務省、消防庁、災害対策で消防庁等の国内関係省庁に WPS の担当窓口、これを設定をしていただきまして動き始めている状況であります。現在外務大臣としてこの WPS を日本の主要外交政策の一環として力強く推進しようということで申し上げたところでありますが、私は9月13日に就任をしているところでありますが、直後の記者会見におきましても WPS をしっかり進めていくことを表明をいたしまして、国連ハイレベルウィークがちょうど9月に開催されて、ルトノ外相ともお会いをしたところでありますが、この話をしましたところ、すぐにそれはもうやってるというような力強いお話があって、これは ASEAN、日本のこうした会を一つの大きなきっかけにして発展させる必要があるのではないかということで、この間努力をしているところであります。そして今、じゃあ具体的に少しずつ取り組んでいることでありますが、まず WPS プラスイノベーションということで、 WPS プラスイノベーションというタイトルのプロジェクトを今動かしているところであります。前回サンフランシスコでもAPEC でお会いをし、隣で議論をさせていただきましたけれども、そこで若いアントプレナーというか起業家の皆さんをお招きをした形で、彼らが見る WPS を通したこの世界観の中で経済という視点からどういうコミットメントができるのか、この辺の議論をしていただきました。そして今日こうした形で WPS イノベーションの、ある意味では大きなフレームワークの中で動いていただく、動くことができる、新しい出会いフレームワークを作ることができるということでありまして、大変嬉しく思っているところであります。そしてまた第2回のグローバル難民フォーラム、昨日でありますが、私帰ってきたところでありますが、その中におきましては、さまざまな国際機関関係者と難民の支援、人道支援におきましての WPS の位置づけということで、専門家の皆さんとともにワークショップも開かせていただき、そして知見を総合する形で、日本の政策というか、アジア全体の平和のために何らかの貢献をしていきたいということで、そのための省庁横断的な連携を目的とした WPS タスクフォースも今準備をしているところであります。これから精力的にそうした方向に向かって進めてまいりたいというふうに思っております。ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。素晴らしい上川大臣になられてのこのリーダーシップで、ここまで本当に短い時間に日本も少しずつではあったんですけれども、一気に今回は進んでいる WPS アジェンダの推進が進んでいるんだなと思いました。実はですね、たくさん質問あったんですけれども、次の公務があってお二人もうすぐ出なければならないという本当に残念なことになっておりますが、本当に一言ずつお願いしただけでもですね、実際にいろいろな活動をされて、女性の外務大臣としてですね、そして世界の場で活躍されていて、そして女性の視点が必要だということを本当に今日の2人のお話で少しの時間だったんですけれども聞くことができ、そして理解が深まったんじゃないかなと思っております。でですね、今日は本当に短い時間だったんですけれども、わざわざ笹川平和財団の方に来てくださりありがとうございました。でこの感謝の気持ちをですね、花束贈呈という形で示したいと思っておりますので、よろしくお願いします。でですね、今日は日本財団のボランティアセンターというがありましてですね、ウクライナの難民支援、そしてこれからマレーシアの植林の活動で活動したいと思っていらっしゃる大学生の友野さんという方と飯島さんに花束贈呈お願いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。します
では友野さん、飯島さん、ありがとうございました。 それではここで上川外務大臣とルトノ外務大臣がご退出されます。皆様、お二人にどうか盛大な拍手をお願いいたします。ここで第2部に備えまして設営を変更いたします。皆様、ご着席のまましばらくお待ちくださいませ。お待たせいたしました。それでは引き続きまして第2部のセッションを始めさせていただきます。ここからは再び笹川平和財団平和構築支援グループの堀場明子主任研究員が進行いたします。それではどうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。大臣のお時間本当に短かったので、実はたくさん質問を用意してたんですけれども、聞けずに残念でしたけれども、たくさんパーソナルエクスペリエンスも話してくださってとっても良かったんじゃないかなと思ってます。その2部はですね、今度2部はですね、ASEAN の女性リーダーたちに集まっていただきました。で、実は ASEAN の中でも WPS に関してさまざまな取り組みがなされていますので、まずはそれを理解した上でですね、議論に移りたいなと思っております。それではまずカルティカさんの方からプレゼンテーションお願いいたします。
Thank you, Dr. Akiko. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kartika. I'm the Project Management Officer. First of all, please allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation to be part of this auspicious occasion. Now, the ASEAN IPR, as we like to call it, we are ASEAN's entity that carries out research and capacity building on peace, on conflict resolution, conflict management, transformation, as well as post-conflict peace building and reconciliation. We are one of the contributors to the implementation of Women, Peace and Security agenda at the regional level, namely through our pool of women experts, the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, and our participation in the drafting and subsequent implementation of the Regional Plan of Action on WPS in ASEAN. Maybe if we go to the first slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Actually, for ASEAN itself, we have quite a long history on women's empowerment. While ASEAN was established in 1967, as early in 1976, ASEAN already had an ASEAN subcommittee on women several years before CEDAW was adopted. And we had the Declaration on the Advancement of Women in the ASEAN region. Now, between 1981 to 2006, all ASEAN member states have ratified or acceded to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And this is the starting point for women, peace, and security. And also, 4 of the ASEAN member states, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, have also ratified the optional protocol to CEDAW on regarding individual complaints. And in 2008, ASEAN has adopted a joint statement and commitment to implement gender mainstreaming, where it recognizes the importance of CEDAW as a guiding international framework. Now, as already mentioned by the two foreign ministers, the Women, Peace and Security agenda has the basis in the United Nations Resolution 1325, UN Security Council 1325, adopted on 31st October 2000. The UNSCR states that reaffirming the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts and in peace building, and stressing the importance of their equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security, and the need to increase their role in decision-making with regard to conflict prevention and resolution. So in that paragraph alone, it states basically the 4 pillars of WPS, which is women's meaningful participation, the prevention of conflict, women's protection, and women's participation in the relief and recovery in post-conflict peace building. Now, the UNSCR 1325 is followed by several resolutions in the subsequent years, as listed down there on the slide. And these resolutions covers also sexual violence as a tactic of war, the monitoring and reporting mechanism on sexual violence in conflict, the establishment of the informal experts group, and calls for support and protection to women's civil society organization, and the support for the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in all stages of peace processes, including in the mechanisms to set up and implement and monitor peace agreements. Now, in parallel, perhaps the next slide, in parallel, ASEAN has several documents referring to women in situations of crisis, such as in natural disaster and conflict. We have the Hanoi Declaration on the Enhancement of Welfare and Development of ASEAN Women and Children. We have the Declaration on Ending Violence Against Women in the ASEAN region, ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Elimination of Violence Against Women. And this all accumulated into 2017, where we have the ASEAN Leaders Joint Statement on Promoting Women, Peace, and Security in ASEAN. Now, this statement commits that the implementation of WPS agenda will be undertaken through a multi-stakeholder efforts and partnership. For the ASEAN IPR, as a direct implementation of this joint statement, we established our first pool of experts under our function, the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, of which Madam Amina is one of the members from the Philippines. This is a way for ASEAN IPR to contribute to the participation pillar of the WPS agenda. And this grouping of women experts are at the ready to support the member states with their expertise. Where they are called upon, they can support to assist peace process and reconciliation in efforts in member states. So expertise and technical support for member states. Additionally, also as earlier mentioned in her statement, Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi also established the second grouping, which is the Southeast Asian Network of Women Peace Mediators and Negotiators. In 2021, we had a regional assessment of the status of women, peace, and security in ASEAN, and this is where the regional study on WPS came in, and this became the basis for the regional plan of action on WPS in ASEAN. Next slide, please. Now, the process of this drafting of the RPA on WPS took the entirety of last year, 2022, in which we had 4 technical working groups, including 2 sessions where it was open for the contributions of the civil society of the region, as well as lessons learned from other regions. I think we learned from the African Union, we learned from the Pacific Islands Forum. So there was also an exchange of knowledge of the experience of other regions in developing plans of actions on WPS. And also there was expressions of support from ASEAN's partners. Several of these partners were invited to be part of this meeting and to express what kind of support they will extend to ASEAN in the development and later on subsequent implementation of WPS agenda in the region. Next slide, please. So finally, at the end of 2022, we have the regional plan of action of ASEAN. Now, what does that contain? If we go to the next slide, I will go very quickly that it has 6 strategic outcomes. Next slide. The first outcome is on the protection. So we start off with the protection of the rights of women, young women, and girls, including marginalized groups in policies, practices, and institutions related to peace and security. So the RPA, the Regional Plan of Action, is based on the 4 pillars of WPS agenda, plus the pillar of monitoring and evaluation. So the first pillar is the protection pillar. The next slide. Strategic outcome 2 is on the women's full, meaningful, and equal participation in institutions, organizations, and decision-making processes related to peace and security, including in leadership positions. So it's very important that we break through these normal roles of where only men are in positions of power to make decisions related to women, but also more women representation in leadership positions. Next slide. This goes to the regional commitments of ASEAN sectoral bodies, institutions, and member states playing an active role in contributing to global, regional, and national conflict prevention and prevention of violence, disasters, and other threats to peace and security. This is where the RPA has the flavor of not being only a regional level commitment, but also the national and local level members also have a responsibility to implement the RPA. Next slide. Outcome 4, peace and security institutions, mechanisms, and processes are successfully preventing sexual gender-based violence. So again, in our region, sexual gender-based violence is still very prevalent, and this is happening not just in terms of during conflict settings, but also domestic settings as well. Next slide, please. The needs of women and girls are met in relief and recovery processes at regional, national, and local levels, and women have equal and meaningful participation in these processes. Next slide. As I mentioned, implementation and coordination, monitoring and evaluation infrastructure and mechanisms are in place. So not only are we just implementing, but we're also monitoring whether or not the RPA is working and whether or not it's achieving the targeted goals. Next slide. So what does this all mean for ASEAN member states? The way we translate women, peace, and security agenda in Southeast Asia is we contextualize it to each member state, what it means to each respective member states, and it's not always in the situation of armed conflict. Oftentimes we translate it to situations of domestic violence. We translate it to the issues of human trafficking. We translate it to the issue of prevention of violent extremism. We translate it to the issues of social conflicts, horizontal conflicts, social economic conflicts. So it's not always in situations of armed conflict. And then now also we still have efforts of mainstreaming gender into the policies of ASEAN member states. And we also try to adapt to emerging new challenges such as climate-induced disasters, climate security, health emergencies, cyber violence, or technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So we are still adapting to these new challenges in the region as well, and how gender can be mainstream into these issues. And right now, we only have 2 member states in ASEAN that has national action plans, which is Indonesia and Philippines. On Monday this week, Philippines launched their 4th generation national action plan. And also like to update that Cambodia, Vietnam, and possibly also Thailand are in the process of developing their national action plan. And I just came back from Cambodia, where there was the launch of the localization toolkit, how member states can translate global regional normative frameworks into the local context of their own respective member states and develop their own national action plan. Now, just as a closing, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is no deadline or timeline for the RPA. It's a living document. But if we take into context the ASEAN Community 2025 target and the subsequent post-2025 vision, WPS and YPS will always be part of that. And that is ASEAN IPRs also report to the high-level task force drafting the post-2025 vision. And for ASEAN member states, ASEAN bodies, ASEAN institutions, we continue to partner with UN Women, with our dialogue partners on working to advance women, peace, and security agenda in the region. And these efforts must be continuous, where women are still out of the conversation in any peace efforts in the national level and the regional level. So maybe I will stop here for now. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。なので ASEAN の地域レベルでですね、実は WPS アジェンダというのの推進がスタートしていると。そしてインドネシアとフィリピンはすでにナショナルアクションプランというのを作ってですね、その方向性、 ASEAN でも示されている方向性をどうやってそれぞれの国で実施するか、そういうプランニングをですね立ててるんですけれども、それで今タイランド、あとカンボジア、ベトナムというところがまた作り始めていて、まだちょっとマレーシアは動きはないようですけれども、他の国も続くであろうということで、今その WPS アジェンダっていうのがリージョナルなレベルで進んでいるというところがお分かりになったんじゃないかなと思っています。それではアミナさんの方からですね、フィリピンの話も踏まえて今回のASEAN のアクションプランについてのコメントも含めてお願いしたいと思っております。よろしくお願いします。
Thank you. Is there about, yeah, there it is. So good morning and salam to all of you. I'd like to thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for supporting peace building and women, peace and security in ASEAN, as well as for inviting us to this panel. And I'd really like to thank the Japanese government for support. 50 years of friendship and cooperation with ASEAN. On a personal note, I am a product of the most important ASEAN-Japanese youth program. That started 50 years ago. It's called the SHIP for Southeast Asian Youth Program. And I'd like to share with you that from the first batch, I belong to the first batch, many national leaders of each of the ASEAN countries have grown from that first batch. So thank you. Thank you so much, Japan. Now, we are now talking about women, the role of women in ASEAN. Next, please. I start by sharing you just a little bit about this particular conference that we organized in 2017. This was a conference on peace and the prevention of violent extremism in Southeast Asia. More than 400 participants came in this two-day conference to show you why it is still as important now as it is when ASEAN started, that we have regional peace and security and stability. And that conference also shows you the support that's given by my government to civil society. This conference was a civil society-led conference in partnership with government and with our development partners. In this conference, we made sure to bring together the most key sectors that we thought we needed to ensure security, peace, and the prevention of violent extremism. So not just women, But the businessmen, we had the business sector, the religious sector, academe, politicians who rarely get engaged in these conversations but who are very important, and youth. And the recommendations that came from that conference found its way into other initiatives of government and also within ASEAN. Next, please. Just a very few of the recommendations that we had from that conference with regards to women, peace, and security and the prevention of violent extremism. As you can see, a lot of focus is on education and the training of women. Recently, our National Action Plan in the Philippines also expands this for youth and for men, boys as well. Political participation in 2017 was as important as it is today. That you heard Ambassador Foreign Minister Retno, and she was saying how important it is to have women at the national level for decision making because they make sure that any agreement is sustainable. And that is not a personal opinion. Studies that have been conducted by international organizations like the UN bear out that particular finding, which is, I guess, why my government always builds our programs in cooperation with civil society, particularly with women. Increase efforts at sharing experiences within the region and within the region with other regions. Education, improving network communication, collaborations. One example, for instance, which I want to bring up already at this point, the women of ASEAN have generations of homegrown experience in empowerment. The men in our communities never really put major stumbling blocks, never really stopped women from leadership position, whether it is in the private sector or it's in education or even in politics. But we need more experience. How do we deal day to day with violent extremists in our community? Who has that experience? The women in the Middle East and North Africa. What don't they have? They don't have our experience in empowering ourselves at the community level without scaring the men. So there's much of cooperation, much knowledge that can be gotten here by sharing. Then very important, we also said, we cannot work just as government alone. You also need the religious leaders to join us. Next, please. Some of our findings found its way into the statement in support of WPS. And then the most, for me, important action of ASEAN was the creation of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. What are we? Our governments initially choose 3 experts from each country to become part of this registry. What do? We wait. We wait to be asked to help, whether it's to lecture, attend meetings, to give our opinion, to do something, to mediate, we wait. But the thing is, the women in this group are all experts, practitioners of mediation, of conflict resolution, of peace building. And over time, as we work with Kartika and the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, there is a growing realization we need to be more active. Otherwise, you have wasted the potential of all the women in this group and the possibility of expanding it. And this is one particular initiative which I think another 50 years of Japanese and ASEAN cooperation can focus on, because the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry is an ASEAN organization. It is part of ASEAN. And therefore, any investment in the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry redounds to the strengthening of ASEAN itself. Next, please. We at the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy were requested to do a lot of consultations in preparation for the Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace, and Security. And again, we made sure we consulted not just with women, but with the security sector, political sector, and others. Next, please. And when this was launched in 2022, we were extremely happy because we found that our recommendations were also part of it. Next, please. These particular recommendations that came from some of our workshops found its way into the RPA, and I focus on this because of two really key initiatives which we need to focus on. Education, especially on women, peace, and security, not just for the women and girls, but also for the men and boys. And the strengthening of regional cooperation plus inter-regional cooperation, the strengthening of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, the strengthening of the ASEAN Women for Peace registry, and the possibility of us now working with the Middle East and North Africa and collaborating. Next, please. In the Philippines, our problematic region, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, has a Bangsamoro Women's Commission, and they have launched their own regional plan of action for women, peace, and security. But, and here's the Sakawa Peace Foundation and the Japanese government might want to pay a little attention, they need more substance in their plan. That means more program, and even more important, more substantial support. It's very nice to hear government leaders say, this is wonderful, congratulations, but we need more support than words. Next, please. This was launched December 11, and Secretary Galvez, our peace advisor, said this is a roadmap for gender equality and women empowerment. And it is a living document, much like the Regional Plan of Action of ASEAN is. And let me just say that for us, this is crucial that we look at implementing the programs or the suggestions in the plans of action because of Gaza and other conflicts around the world, which are finding its way into our neighborhood. Just when we thought we were succeeding in our peace process with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, succeeding in getting more women at the table, Gaza happens. A few years ago, Afghanistan happened, and with the victory of the Taliban, that had impact on us. We see the rise of fundamentalism. So we need to educate and encourage our people to stand strong behind human rights, democracy, pluralism, the ASEAN values, and we need to be able to do our collaborations so that we can find a more efficient, a more practical solution to the problems that we are facing. And I think maybe I can you just go fast to the next? This is our idea of bringing ASEAN women together with MENA, the women of the Middle East and North Africa. And let me just inform that in the Philippines, our government agrees that this is a good idea, and perhaps the Japanese government and Sasakawa might want to have a discussion with us on this, because this could be not just a conference, but the start of regular collaboration between the women of ASEAN through the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry and the network that Minister Retno initiated, together with the women of the Middle East and North Africa. And lastly, last slide, please. Last slide, please. Next. If I may invite all of you to listen to my podcast. It's on its second year. We started 2021. We have won an award from Austria as the best in communicating our advocacy. It's a weekly podcast called She Talks Peace, available, just Google it. And I think you will learn from the conversations we've had with women from Myanmar, from Japan, Ms. Akiko was one of our early interviewees from North Africa, Middle East, the United States. We think it is very crucial that we expand the reach of those who will support women for peace and security, because any investment in women means you are investing in people who invest and protect others. So thank you very much.
アミナさんありがとうございました。フィリピンもですね、皆さんミンダナオとそれからさらに南の方で実は紛争が起きていて、和平対話が行われて、それで今のところ平和にはなってはいるんですけれども、これからさらにそれがしっかりインプリメンテーション、実行に移されるかどうかっていうところが一番問題になってくるところでですね、でアフガニスタンの話、ガザの話が直接的に彼らの生活にも結びついているっていうところも我々の中ではすごく遠い話として聞こえてくるかもしれないですけれども、やはりアフガニスタンそしてガザの出来事がありますと、そこの地域にいるやっぱ過激派な人たちがですね、やはりさらなる活動を始めるということで、もう目の前にある問題としてそのガザの問題、アフガニスタンの問題もそうだったんですがあるというところもプラスアルファ改めて付け加えたいなと思います。でそこにまた女性の視点が入るということが平和に導かれるというところで WPS がまた重要になってくるということだと思います。それではヌルギザさんの方からマレーシアの経験も踏まえてですね、さまざまなチャレンジズ挑戦についてお話ししていただければと思います。2人のお話を聞いた上でのコメントという形でお話ししていただければなと思っております。よろしくお願いします。
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Madam Akiko. Of course, the esteemed presenters, I think it was very instructive and crucial for us to hear not just from Ibu Kartika but also Ibu Amina. I wanted to extend my deepest appreciation to Tan Sri Sasakawa as well as the President, Mr. Tsunami, and the entire Sasakawa team. It brings me a lot of mixed feelings because the last time I came here, it was to speak about the importance of defending the worth and the voice of Muslim Democrats. And here listening to you concretely, at the time, the current Prime Minister of Malaysia was a political detainee. And Sasakawa SPF had given and lent the space for us to bring up the importance of Muslim Democrats everywhere, including, as you mentioned, Mina, the Middle Eastern and North African regions. Sheikh Rashid Ghanouchi, who was also one of the key inspirations for us, former Speaker of the Tunisian Parliament, who is now at the age of 82 in prison. So I think, as we stated, how crucial it is. You know, you see the evolution. We started on Muslim Democrats to give the justification, the explanation that Islam indeed coexists with democracy. I think that's part and parcel of your own organization. But now, as you look at the state of the world, I believe it's important, you know, the words of the both female foreign ministers ring still in my ears. I felt very inspired, but also so tragically saddened, because women everywhere are left less secure. You can't even bring up your children or even your loved ones or care for families in a normal manner. Even what we're enjoying today, discussing, when it is supposed to be the key rights enshrined in a universal declaration. So I think the 3 points I would say today is the first, taking into account the presentation made by Ibu Kartika. You talk about the 4 pillars of WPS. I think, yes, of course, Japan has been taking an active interest to make sure you rehabilitate, you build bridges, but the prevention factor, the prevention of conflicts, the cost is extremely, I don't think we can name it. I mean, a lot of members of parliament across the world have lost words in describing, you know, you can say genocide, of course, but to describe the plight faced by women. I think the worst I've heard is having to give birth without any painkillers. I think even a C-section, that is something completely unimaginable, as you know, a lot of women go through, but never to this extent. So that's the first point, where we talk about the crucial importance of a long-term plan and vision that incorporates women. The National Action Plan, and I'm sure when I speak to my colleagues, and of course the government of Malaysia, Malaysia must take part and have and curate, because what is your vision for women? Not just in the region, but worldwide, 5 years, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And how can we each, not just Southeast Asianers, but the MENA region, with Japan, leverage on our respective experiences, our horrifying histories, challenges, but build upon that to make sure that women and families, communities are safer everywhere in the future. Now, number two is in terms of the ask, yeah? The issue is countering violent extremism. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress enough to you, Tunisia and Malaysia started the discussion to talk about terrorists per capita flying to Daesh, flying to fight in Syria. It is a problem for the governments, and it is something that we have to consider very seriously as we look at issues and we try to strengthen democracy, but also to look at different conflicts using justice as the measure. It is not about whether a life in Gaza is worth less than a life of a Ukrainian. Both have to be defended. And that's why, for me, the collaboration and discussions when we have helps us in building these bridges, because we need to know how important it is to strengthen the mechanisms in the rule of law, not just nationally, but internationally. We mentioned how many UN resolutions. I don't have to even describe to you how many have been transgressed. But you know, for everyone that is not listened to, for everyone that you kind of allow a particular rogue state escape with impunity, you will give reason for more extremism to flourish. And that is why, that is the concrete reason why money, substantive support, going back to Puan Amina's ask, the last two slides, ensuring substantive and concrete help is given. Reform, ladies and gentlemen, reform is necessary. Veto powers and veto votes, trust me, it will only end up with further disastrous consequences. And that's why, from the perspective of Malaysia, and I can share a little bit more, not just trying to rally young Malaysians to support the United Nations, to support the UN mechanisms, be it the refugee schools that have been bombed. Why? Because at the least you know that there is a moral compass which the world abides to. And that's why, again, sometimes the fear is when we have gone through horrendous wars, we remain pacifist. We focus on peace building. We focus on post-crisis intervention. And I'm not advocating intervention, I'm just saying we have to make sure reforms take place, whether at the UN Security Council, whether even at the ASEAN level. I'm speaking about this even in Malaysia, to make sure we give justice where it's needed. So people don't have to take extreme measures, because there are ways, there's rule of law that applies to you, whoever you may be. So from the Malaysian experience, I think other than making sure we are included in the countries in Southeast Asia, I hope Bisma Putra doesn't school me after this, but we also are working towards making sure our 11th and 12th Malaysia plan includes women, because gender perspectives is included. But I remember even as far back as in 2009, we actually had a women-based budgeting. But it was a study together with UNDP, but to implement it, because as you know, when governments change, you lack institutional memory, right? So sometimes you need to have that institutional memory, no matter who the government, who the prime minister is. You always include gender-based budgeting. What does it matter to women and men? Men who face, for example, osteoporosis is less in number compared to women. So I always say, when you allocate specific funding, effectively you end up with more savings that can help everyone in the community. So similarly, in conflict regions, you know what method of violence, sexual-based violence, are used to weaponize against women. So in terms of also our involvement in peacekeeping efforts, I was really kind of excited to hear, in terms of making sure women join the peacekeeping force. I think we haven't gone that far yet, like Indonesia, but these sharing experiences can help us in order to emulate. They used to say, if it ain't broken, why fix it? But we have to fix a lot here. But I think we also need to share and emulate each other's experiences in the spirit of ASEAN, as well as in the spirit of learning from our bilateral interactions. So if we talk about Malaysia, there's 849 Malaysian peacekeepers serving in 5 UN peacekeeping operations. 85 of them are women, but deployed in Lebanon. Yeah. So we just want to make sure we expand it, but not to fight more wars, right? Again, going back to WPS pillar of prevention. So I think enough is enough, and when it's 2023, we're going to a new year, it really breaks. It shouldn't just break my heart, it should break everyone's heart that it's just going on and things are not improving. So my sense is, I do believe that ASEAN can certainly contribute, but we do need to add on the element of communication via the podcast, but also intervention. And I mean in terms of making sure there's more visits on the ground, there's more kind of pressure placed to ensure that countries, before it escalates further, are able to come out with a more fortuitous solution. And this becomes all of our collective responsibilities because, and I have to say this, when the term or the group that are called the boat people comes to anyone's shores, it's always very challenging. And this is where I feel the example, what Turkey did in the wake of the Syrian refugee crisis, is quite useful for us, because they are able to utilize and issue out work permits, economize, and eventually it became a more symbiotic relationship between those who have lost their homes as refugees and the host country. It is not an easy topic. Like I said, going back to WPS pillar, you prevent, you don't have to face the issue of the exodus of refugees. But you don't prevent, everyone else will have to face the consequences. So my final point, I think, in all of this is, I hope from today, and not just to commend Sasakawa, but I think from today, the National Action Plan should also include eventually visits and engagement further that we can have, so that in the small pockets of problems faced, Southern Mindanao or the Bangsamoro, I remember when the Bangsamoro legislation was first discussed by legislators. I think those kind of laws actually are in need, but sometimes we only remember to do it. I'm not talking about the Philippines, talking about, our region when the crisis erupts. Yeah? So again, how do we factor in women? And I think the main point here is to have men who support the same mission. So I believe it is crucial to give support, to also validate and recognize that men are also in this pursuit with us. I always remember the importance of teaching my sons, because you always begin at home, respecting women, knowing that if you have to wash the dishes, it's not your sister's job. It is a collective job. And all these small bits of cultural intervention is so important because it shouldn't take us, we had gone through a Holocaust, we are going through another Holocaust, but we do not want to go through yet another such experience to remind us that women's lives do matter. Thank you, Madam Akiko.
ありがとうございました。今、イザさんがパレスティナのちょっと見せてあげてください。パレスティナの
so Malaysian government hosted this an event at a stadium and a few others to commemorate our support and also the fact that for Palestine, but I think the important bit is also it's a 75-year-old kind of decade crisis. But I think what I want to also state here, when Ukraine was attacked, I also voiced support, and I feel what's important for us is to always be consistent, because with that consistency, then you always lend and that reminder that all lives matter. And I think right now it's I can't believe it's even hard to even get a ceasefire going. I think that's why in this particular instance it seemed to be a lot easier for all the other crises. But maybe that's the thing. I didn't plan to to make it just about Gaza, but I feel because again it's a very relevant issue, and I'm glad the Minister Retno mentioned and gave voice to it. Yeah.
ございます。いや、ここまでコミットしてるっていうことがちょっと見せたいなと思ったんですね。なのでウクライナの時も、そしてガザの時もそうで、やはり先ほどのお話プリベンションっていう話ありましたけれども、やっぱり紛争が起きてしまって空爆が起きた、人は死ぬ、そして女性子供が一番先に苦しむというのをまず防がないと話にならないということなので、次の世代にそうならないように、でそのためには女性の視点をさまざまな政策にしっかりと入れていくっていうことが本当にこれ急務なんだなと思って聞いておりました。ありがとうございました。でここで皆さんからの質問も受け付けたいなと思っております。で日本と ASEAN がもちろん WPS の分野で今まだ全然協力という形では見えてはいないんですけれども、今日のお話上川大臣の強いですね、リーダーシップのもとの WPS に関しても ASEAN といろいろな形で連携できるんじゃないかなという期待が今日お話も聞きながら思った次第なんですけれども、また今日のここの3人もASEAN の女性のリーダーとしてさまざまな分野で活躍されている方たちですので、WPS と今日本と ASEAN の関わりということで話を進めてまいりましたけれども、幅広く質問もお受けしますので、質問のある方受け付けたいと思います。いかがでしょうか。いくつか受け付けたいと思っております。では1つ2つ、まず2つ受け付けたいと思います。できるだけ短くお願いいたします。お名前と所属もお願いします。
関口と申します。所属はもう退職したのでないんですが、昨年まで日本ユネスコ協会連盟というところにおりました。私の質問はアミナラスールさんについてです。私は、25年ぐらいフィリピンのザンボアンガというところにあるセルシエラ・ダイアログ・ムーブメントというところとですね、付き合っていると、個人的に支援をしている。その中にちょっと気づいたんですけれども、社会のですね、上層の方、例えばラスールさんとかお母様のシャンタニーナ・ラスールさんとか、シルシラ・ダイアログ・ムーブメントでもボードメンバーのような立場のムスリムの女性というのは非常にアクティブですね。例えば宗教間対話についても非常に活発であると。ところがレイ・ウォーメンって言いますか、何て言うんだろう、一般のムスリムの方、女性の方ですね、ちょっと お静かな方が多いなと、声を上げてやる方がキリスト教とのそのレイウォーメンと比べて静かな方が多いなという印象があるんです。でまずそれが私の印象が正しいのかどうかと。で2番目にもし正しいとしたらばその裏にあるのは何か。例えばウラマーの方、モスクに行ってウラマーの方が非常に厳しいとかですね、あるいはアブサヤフみたいなところに狙われたくないというのがあるのかということをお聞きしたい。でそれを打開するにはどうしたらいいのかというのを伺えればと思います。すみません、トップバッターがこんな話で男性ですいません、ジェンダーバランスが。
いえ、ありがとうございます。ミンダナオのザンボアンガにいらっしゃったということでありがとうございました。それではもう一人まずは受け付けたいと思ってます。
まずは貴重なお話ありがとうございました。明治大学の白田良樹です。質問なんですけれども、やっぱりジェンダーレス化、やっぱり差別、ジェンダー的な役割で差別をなくしていこうっていうのが本日のお話のメインポイントだと思うのですが、そういった中でやっぱり若者の視点とかそういう参画が重要だというお話もいくつか出てたと思うのですが、やっぱり日本は特にそうだと思うんですけど、やっぱりそういった大臣の方とかがあまりそういった情報を発信しない、 SNS とかあまりやっていないっていうのが現状で、それでさらに日本の若者は政治離れっていうのも深刻化していて、こういった状況の中で我々若者がどういった経路でそういった先進的なというかそういった情報を得られるのかっていう考え方がありましたらちょっとお聞きしたいなと思いました。以上です。
はい、ありがとうございます。東南アジアのASEAN 諸国の若者がどういう状況なのかも含めてですね、お聞きしたいなと思います。それではアミナさんの方よろしくお願いいたします。
Well, first, I'd like to thank you very much for supporting our communities in Zamboanga City. For the information of everybody here, Zamboanga City is the hub. That's the jumping off port for the island communities, island provinces of Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and Basilan. And when you're talking about violent extremism, Sulu is particularly affected. That is why it is so important, and I'm grateful that you chose to work to support our communities in Zamboanga City. First, when you talk about the nature of Muslim women, let me just say that the Muslims in the Philippines and Indonesia, Malaysia, they may be reserved, but they have power. And if you look, kid you not, if you look back in history, you see very powerful Muslim women who essentially maybe manipulated politics so that their spouse or father could rise up in the Sultanate. You see very strong women who support education and the establishment of academic centers, but almost, I think all of us who grew up in Malay traditions, we always are told by our parents, never shame a man. If you're going to be angry at your husband, do it when there are only two of you in the bathroom or the bedroom, and then you can say anything you want, but never in public. In public, you must always defer to him so that his value rises. And even today, with the younger generation, that is still apparent. But the women retain their power. However, our community is changing. We worry about the very fundamentalist interpretations of Islam coming from the Middle East through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, down to Muslim Mindanao, Indonesia, Malaysia. Because there, they are encouraging Muslim men, Muslim communities to say, it is Islamic to make sure that women just stay at home and take care of babies. That it is not Islamic to have women in the parliament, like our sister Iza Anwar, or women professionals like Kartika, who travels by herself all over ASEAN. We have to stop that. And the way to stop that is by education, educating our women. And let me just say that illiteracy in conflict communities is very high. In Muslim Mindanao, the illiteracy of adults, 70%. So if 70% of your adults no read, no write, what future do you think their children will have? And this is not just for Muslim Mindanao, it's true for Myanmar, especially in the areas of the Rohingya, southern Thailand, in Indonesia where you have conflict. So if you improve literacy, adult literacy, you improve education, you empower women to make sure we defend our democratic space. The ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation supports initiatives where we can talk about why is it important to have women participate in decision-making at the community level to the national level. That kind of a dialogue also is important to help empower our women so they know their rights. So thank you for that. As far as the youth is concerned, Southeast Asia is a very young population. And revolutions in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and elsewhere show you if the young people decide to change the government, they will. That was the situation, people power. In your independence movements, and it looks like young people may not be as politically active now, but they are still a huge base. What worries us in the Muslim communities where you have conflict is that young people are now being accessed through social media by violent extremists who have changed the interpretation of Islam. And unfortunately, our governments are not very good at social media. Our governments will send, I hope they're not sending fax statements anymore, but they will do a write-up, a press release, they will send it to all of the newspapers, television station, radio station, but they don't know how to use social media. So nobody really is countering the messages addressed to young people on social media. Maybe the Japanese government and Sasakawa can also take a look at how to work with us on countering and training people to counter this interpretation, this very bad interpretation that's coming out in social media. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。じゃあ、伊佐さんの方からぜひOkay, first. Okay, sure.
Okay, I just wanted to help answering the question from Shirota-san about youth engagement. Actually, another agenda that is also popular is youth, peace, and security, and that is another UN Security Council resolution 2250 since 2015. In Southeast Asia, we only have Philippines, who has a national action plan on youth, peace, and security. Globally in the world, only 5 or 6 countries have this YPS agenda. ASEAN IPR is currently doing a regional study on assessing youth, peace, and security policies in the 10 ASEAN member states. Unfortunately, this study is still a long way from finishing. Hopefully by next year we can finish it. But what we see is right now, even in ASEAN mechanisms, we have something called ASEAN Youth Forum or ASEAN Youth Meetings. But most of the times, these are like cultural exchanges. These are like just people-to-people exchange, getting to know your peers from other countries. But it's not very much active political participation or contribution of the youth towards the political system. We have the interface of youth representative with the ASEAN leaders during the ASEAN summit. But if I may be honest, I think it's still tokenism. I think in youth, peace, and security, which has also similar pillars with WPS, YPS has 5 pillars. There's still the aspect of youth being used as decorations. Just you're there for a photo opportunity, and I understand that. You don't really have the chance to actually say what you want to say to your political leaders. And that unfortunately creates apathy and disconnect, and a lot of youth are very much dissatisfied with the politics in their respective countries, Indonesia included, and we have elections next year. And that is very difficult and very dangerous because, you know, youth are very technology savvy, and many of the dangers exist in the technological world, in the digital world. Misinformation, disinformation, you know, the dark web, recruitment for radical, violent extremist groups, this happening in those aspects. But youth have the potential to counter that as well. Because you're so fluent in using technology, you also develop the tools to fight that. And this is where actually the government should work with the youth, because they speak the same language. They speak the language of technology. So if our government partners can realize that these kinds of partnership, along with the corporations as well, the private sector, the technological companies can work, this will be the perfect public-private partnership, actually. Yeah.
ありがとうございます。もうまさに若者の政治参画っていうのは本当に女性も含めてですね、これもこれからの未来を決める重要なポイントだと思っています。では伊沢さんの経験も踏まえてぜひお願いします。
I mean, it's amazing, intervention responses from both Ibu Kartika and Ibu Amina. I wanted to just add on. You see, 2018 saw a period of growing conservatism amongst Malaysian Muslims versus Indonesian Muslims. So if you look at the poll that was conducted, our Muslims, young Muslims in Malaysia, far more conservative than our Indonesian counterparts. So sometimes it's important to kind of understand these trends. It just worsened with COVID. Because you look at closures, Malaysia had undergone the most number of weeks of school closure. You see a disconnect because at the end of the day, the young people, feel, can I trust politicians? In Malaysia, we had crisis, we had many prime ministers in a short span of time. I mean, this is not just related to, restricted to us. But the point is that disillusionment is a problem, but it also can be an opportunity. I think for me, I was a latecomer to TikTok. I have to say it didn't help me since I lost my seat last elections. I actually never in my life before I've lost the support of young 18-year-olds until 2022, sorry, yes. So it was really, even for me, it's a lesson, right? Because at the end of the day, you think you are giving the statements, you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, but you're not on TikTok. And so no 18-year-olds who are now eligible to vote know what it is that you're doing, what you represent. So, it's a good lesson. And I think it's also important because they went through a pandemic. We went through a pandemic. So much uncertainty. Young people, what kind of future do they have? So I think a lot of empathy from the part of the politician, from activists will help a lot. And I think Kartika, she went right on in it, right? Already have youth and security platform, but our government's moving fast enough to adopt. The second part I wanted to just add on, because when you talk about women, so that's one. The US, more than 70% of youth, young Americans, disagree with Biden, their current president, on the handling of the war on Gaza. So I think it is a global phenomenon, and it's important not to take youth or youth figures or young leaders as just mere tokenism, for photo ops, because of course, we all like to take photos and selfies, not just young people. This is one of the, hallmarks of being Southeast Asianist and of course Asian. But I think as we move forward, we have to have a concrete agenda. I think the strategy is right. Get the experts to do it. Don't get Generasi X to do it. I'm a proud X generation. I think this is where we have to also accord the different skill sets across the generation. There's a new publication that showcases the most successful of organizations are one that is able to harness from the boomer generation, although we do have criticisms on some of them, but the point is across Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. So I think this spectrum, that kind of stakeholder engagement representation will help you unearth with more effective policies. So please make sure after today you join in the movement, get your voice heard and make sure it's incorporated in the youth. And yes, next Tom, thank you.
ありがとうございました。残念ながらですね、もう時間となってしまいましたので、この辺りで終わりたいと思いますけれども、今日は女性の視点がどうして必要なのか、この辺り外務大臣、お二人の外務大臣、そして今日ここにいらっしゃる3人の素晴らしい女性リーダーの一言一言からですね感じられたんじゃないかなと思っております。でやはり多様な視点っていうのがさまざまな意思決定のところに入っていかないと、うまくいかないっていうのがもう本当に分かっている、分かりきったことなんですけれども、日本はまだまだそこが進んでいないということもありますので、ぜひ、これを機会に ASEAN の人たちと一緒にですね、日本が連携を強化していけるようにさまざまな分野でですね活躍、今日も皆さん来ていらっしゃいますけれども、連携していけたらなと思っております。今日は皆さんありがとうございました。皆さん拍手で終わりたいと思います。ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。以上をもちまして本日のイベントを終了させていただきます。お帰りの際はどうかお忘れ物のないようにご注意ください。なお、お使いいただきました同時通訳レシーバーはお出口にて回収いたします。また今後の参考のため後日アンケートご協力依頼のメールをお送りさせていただきます。どうかご意見をお寄せください。当財団では今後も WPS に対する取り組みを続けてまいります。引き続き皆様のご支援を賜りますようお願い申し上げます。本日のご参加誠にありがとうございました。
Picture was taken away.